Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I'm here today to look at the long list for the National Book Award for Fiction 2024. This is a book prize I am always really interested in following. The Pulitzer Prize for Fiction is definitely the major literary prize that I have been following for the longest, but the National Book Award is really not that far behind. And then I discovered the Nobel Prize, the Booker Prize, the Women's Prize a little bit later, but they are sort of the origin stories. And I feel like there have been a couple of years where the National Book Award for Fiction was a little bit erratic. They definitely have had years where they've made some sort of eccentric choices, but that does always make them interesting, especially to follow. And it's an award that likes to beat its own path compared to the other ones. It is actually very good at diversity. It's usually really good at portraying a diverse array of stories and backgrounds. And that makes it a really interesting long list to look at. I love to look at long lists and best of lists as tools of discovery, and the National Book Award is always really good at that because there's usually a pretty good blend of books you might expect to see on a long list and some books that are discoveries to you. And I think a perfect case in point for that is my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I discovered this book because it was on the long list for the National Book Award the year it was released. I think that was about 4 years ago at this point. And as soon as I read the description of it, I knew that I wanted to read it. I ordered a copy and I loved it. And here we are about 4 years later. And every time I refer to it, I have to call it my beloved. I feel like it's expected now. And just let this be a PSA. If you have not read The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philyaw, you should probably do that. Even if you are someone who is not a big fan of short story collections, I have had a lot of luck recommending this story collection to people. I've gotten feedback from people who say, I don't even like short story collections, and I liked this book. So just a shout out to a book that I discovered entirely because of the long list for the National Book Award for Fiction. Before we get started looking at the long list, I should note my dog Teddy is passed out asleep on the floor next to me. Let me see if I can... There he is, just asleep, and he is snoring at the moment, so you might be able to hear him. You might not. It's always really impossible to tell if people are going to be able to hear it or not, but I just wanted to mention that in case you can. I will also note that all of the books that I am going to talk about in this video will have affiliate links in the description box down below. If you'd like more information about the books, you can follow those links to bookshop.org. If I spark an interest in reading any of these books or purchasing any of these books specifically, if you use those links, I will get like a small percentage of the sale from Bookshop. So just FYI. Otherwise, you can use your local library. It's always good to support your local library or an independent bookstore. It got cold where I live today, or yesterday actually. So I'm wearing my tattered cover sweatshirt today. Now, without further ado, let's take a quick look at the long list. I will note that according to the National Book Foundation website, the 2024 fiction long list includes authors at all stages of their careers and features 3 debut novels and 1 debut short story collection. 2 authors on the fiction long list have been previously honored by the National Book Foundation. They are Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. She was a finalist for the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 2020 for The Undocumented Americans. And Rachel Kushner was a finalist for the National Book Award for Fiction in 2008 for Telex from Cuba and 2013 for The Flamethrowers. And I would also like to note that the judges for fiction are Jamie Ford, Zane Jukadar, Chawa Magana, and Reginald McKnight. The chair of the jury for fiction this year is Lauren Groff, and I have Matrix by Lauren Groff faced out on my shelf right there. Excellent book. And I recently had a conversation about the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and whether or not there are some changes that it could make. And one of the things I talked about is whether or not they should disclose the identity of the jury. And my only little cautionary note for myself is that if you know the identity of a jury in advance, it is really possible to go down wild rabbit holes trying to guess what particular judges will like and respond to. And I have fully fallen down that rabbit hole because as I was looking at the long list this morning, I was thinking to myself, ooh, that seems like something Lauren Groff would like. And it can be really insightful and helpful. It can also be a rabbit hole that you never crawl back out of again. The last thing before we get into the long list is just dates. The shortlist for the National Book Award for Fiction will be announced on October 1st. That's not that far away from where we are right now. So if you are someone who is inclined to read an entire long list, you don't have a whole lot of time to do that, but I think the reason they have such a short ramp to the shortlist is that the winner announcement is on November 20th, and the National Book Foundation loves to do events with the authors who are on the shortlist. So having that little bit of extra time before the winner announcement, or between the shortlist announcement and the winner announcement, gives them a lot of time to do those. And those can be very interesting events. If I lived in a city where they had them, it would be really great to attend. Oh well. And actually, now that I think about it, I haven't mentioned that this is actually the 75th ceremony for the National Book Awards, so the ceremony itself should be very interesting. I don't think they've announced a host yet, but it's usually a fun ceremony to watch. They stream it online, and I just find this to be a fun prize to follow. And that will take us to the long list. Although I do want to make a note, because every time I don't mention this in a video where I react to a best of list or a long list or a short list, I get angry comments from people who say, how dare you review books that you have not read? These are not reviews. They are not intended as reviews. I've read one of the books that is on this long list. I can speak to the quality of that book from personal experience. Otherwise, I love to use long lists and best of lists as tools of discovery. So the National Book Award for Fiction is a really good tool for that. Again, because it has a pretty good mix of books that you are familiar with and might expect to see, and some new discoveries. So I like to look at this list and see what I might want to read and think about whether or not it has challenged my perception of books that I maybe decided not to read. So that is the intention. These are not reviews. It's really just looking at this as a tool of discovery to see how many of these books I might want to add to my ever-growing TBR. The first book that is on the long list for the National Book Award for Fiction 2024 is Ghost Roots, Stories by Pemi Aguda. Here is what the publisher says. In this beguiling collection of 12 imaginative stories set in Lagos, Nigeria, Pemi Aguda dramatizes the tension between our yearning to be individuals and the ways we are haunted by what came before. In Manifest, a woman sees the ghost of her abusive mother in her daughter's face. Shortly after, the daughter is overtaken by wicked and destructive impulses. In Breast Milk, a wife forgives her husband for his infidelity. Months later, when she is unable to produce milk for her newborn, she blames herself for failing to uphold her mother's feminist values and doubts her fitness for motherhood. In Things Boys Do, a trio of fathers finds something unnatural and unnerving about their infant sons. As their lives rapidly fall to pieces, they begin to fear that their sons are the cause of their troubles. And in 24 Alhaji Williams Street, a teenage boy lives in the shadow of a mysterious disease that's killing the boys on his street. These and other stories in Ghost Roots map emotional and physical worlds that lay bare the forces of family, myth, tradition, gender, and modernity in Nigerian society. Sounds really interesting. I had actually seen announcements about this book when it was going to be released, and the reason I didn't feel inclined to pick it up then is that it sounds imaginative in a way that sometimes falls flat for me, and it's a book that I feel like I would have wanted more feedback from other people before committing to myself. That's something I frequently do. I'm not really someone who's going to commit to reading a long list. I like to pick and choose the ones that I'm interested in off the long list, and then watch and listen as other people read and respond to the books. And then again, maybe it will challenge a perception that I had going in, and maybe it'll make me reconsider. So I'm glad that this made the long list, because now hopefully people will read this book and start talking to me about it. If you have read it, let me know in the comment section down below, because I am someone who's interested in short stories. I know a lot of people struggle with them. I'm a fan. I would just be curious to hear what people think of it, because it does sound like something that I would be interested in, but I haven't really been willing to commit to it so far. So we'll see. The next book on the fiction long list is one of the ones that you are bound to have heard of, and it's the first book that I own a copy of. It's Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. This has been one of the biggest or most critically lauded books of the year. It's also been just a touch divisive because I think it is described as inventive and sort of unlike other books that you might read. And it seems that some readers who pick it up don't respond well to that, which is always kind of interesting. So this is definitely one of the books that you might have expected to see on the National Book Award long list. And it's a good show of strength because I think Martyr came out of the gate very strong. It was on the New York Times' Best Books of 2024 so far in June. It was on Time's list of the Best Books of 2024 so far in June as well. And then it started to feel like there was a little bit of a backlash. And that sometimes happens because I feel like once a book is recommended with authority with like a Best of 2024 so far list or the National Book Award list, people who might not have automatically gravitated to it will read it. And those people might not necessarily respond to the book the way that people who heard the description of the book on its own and decided that they wanted to read it. If that kind of makes sense. Like before you get an official stamp from like the New York Times or the National Book Award Foundation, people who gravitate toward a book are sort of self-selecting. They're saying, this sounds like something that I should read. And then there are people who just want to read the books that are on the best of lists and the prize lists, and maybe they weren't the audience that the book was most likely to gravitate toward. And it's just kind of interesting to chart the ups and downs of things like that. I was actually sent a copy of this book from the publisher, Knopf, which means that it came with a zine, which is kind of fun. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'm hoping to read it before the end of the year. I don't know if I will read it before the shortlist is announced. I feel pretty confident that this is looking at a spot on the shortlist, but we'll find out. From the publisher, Cyrus Shams is a young man grappling with an inheritance of violence and loss. His mother's plane was shot down over the skies of the Persian Gulf in a senseless accident, and his father's life in America was circumscribed by his work killing chickens at a factory farm in the Midwest. Cyrus is a drunk, an addict, and a poet whose obsession with murders leads him to examine the mysteries of his past, toward an uncle who rode through Iranian battlefields dressed as the angel of death to inspire and comfort the dying, and toward his mother through a painting discovered in a Brooklyn art gallery that suggests she may not have been who or what she seemed. Kaveh Akbar's Martyr is a paean to how we spend our lives seeking meaning in faith, art, ourselves, and others. And I think, as I was saying, this feels like a good show of strength because I don't think I really finished that thought. It was showing a lot of promise in June and after the release of the book. And then it started to feel like some people read it who didn't respond to it so well, which sort of makes you wonder how much this book is going to be able to go the distance. Like, will it show up on, say, the New York Times Best Books of the Year list? Will it be a candidate for the National Book Award? Will it be a candidate for the Pulitzer next year? Things like that. And appearing on the National Book Award for Fiction long list is a good show of strength. So I think this is not the last we're going to see of Martyr. And I fully expect that this is probably going to be on the shortlist. I think it's a good candidate for the win. The National Book Award for Fiction particularly loves inventiveness and imaginative books. The winner for last year was Blackouts by Justin Torres, which was frequently described as one of the most inventive or thinking outside the box ways of writing a novel from last year. And the fact that people have said that about Martyr makes me think that it really has a solid chance to win the National Book Award for Fiction in 2024. But we will have to wait and see how that goes. I will be shocked if it's not on the shortlist when we get to that. Now we get to The Most by Jessica Anthony, and I am really excited to see this book here. It was one of my most anticipated books for the last part of 2024. I will link that video down below because there's at least one other book on this list that had appeared in that video. We'll get to it. And I have been really wanting to read it. This is also a short book. It's a novella. So if you're looking for something for Shorty September, pick up a copy of The Most because I'm like feeling pretty positive it's under 200 pages. And I'm really interested in it. I requested that my library purchase a copy. They have been in the process of procuring this book for like 2 months at this point. And I'm starting to lose patience. I love libraries. I love supporting libraries. It's just a fact that sometimes things happen really slowly. So I'm hoping I will get my copy from the library soon. When I do, I would love to read it. So I'm thrilled to see this book on this list, even though I haven't actually read it. But it is something that I'm really curious to read. Here's the description from the publisher. It's November 3rd, 1957. As Sputnik 2 launches into space carrying Laika, the doomed Soviet dog, a couple begin their day. Virgil Beckett, an insurance salesman, is not particularly happy in his job, but he fulfills his role, or the role. Kathleen Beckett, once a promising tennis champion with a key shot up her sleeve, is now a mother and homemaker. On this unseasonably warm Sunday, Kathleen decides not to join her family at church. Instead, she unearths her old red bathing suit and descends into the deserted swimming pool of their apartment complex in Newark, Delaware. And then she won't come out. Set over the course of 8 hours, The Most masterly breaches the shimmering surface of a seemingly idyllic mid-century marriage, immersing us in the unspoken truth beneath. I mean, it sounds fascinating, right? The reference to a doomed Soviet dog does give me pause. I am not someone who enjoys reading books or watching movies where something happens to a dog. I don't think the fate of Laika is going to be a plot point in the book, but I will admit the only thing that gives me pause about it is that. However, I am willing to give the book a try because I don't think it's really going to be a big plot point of the book. I think it's much more going to be about the marriage. So there's that. Now we have Catalina by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. She is the one who had been longlisted for the nonfiction prize in the past. This is one of the books that I had completely not heard of before when this announcement came. From the publisher. When Catalina is admitted to Harvard, it feels like the fulfillment of destiny. A miracle child escapes death in Latin America, moves to Queens to be raised by her undocumented grandparents, and becomes one of the chosen. But nothing is simple for Catalina, least of all her own complicated, contradictory, ruthlessly probing mind. Now a senior, she faces graduation to a world that has no place for the undocumented. Her sense of doom intensifies her curiosities and desires. She infiltrates the school's elite subcultures, internships and literary journals, posh parties and secret societies, which she observes with the eye of an anthropologist and an interloper's skepticism. She is both fascinated and repulsed. Craving a great romance, Catalina finds herself drawn to a fellow student, an actual budding anthropologist eager to teach her about the Latin American world she was born into, but never knew, even as her life back in Queens begins to unravel. And every day, the clock ticks closer to the abyss of life after graduation. Can she save her family? Can she save herself? What does it mean to be saved? I feel like I'm having a Secret Lives of Church Ladies moment because I bumped the book into my coffee thermos and made a loud noise. I feel really drawn to that. And when I prepare for one of these videos, obviously I have to look at the list because usually I need to gather information so I'm prepared to do these, and I need to get like thumbnails of the covers so I can put them up and things like that. But if I'm unfamiliar with the book, I try not to read the description until I'm actually saying it out loud to you. So that was the very first I experienced of this. And I'm going to leave this tab open because I want to see if my library has a copy of this. I want to see if it's on any of my subscription apps. If it's not, I might think about, this is sort of my process. Usually I'll see if the library has it or if it's on any of my subscription apps on audio. And if none of those happen, then I start to consider whether or not I would like to purchase it. That's kind of what happened with The Most. When my library decided to purchase it, I decided to wait. But now, since it's taking forever, I am kind of debating whether or not I should make a purchase. And that's the process I'm going to go through with Catalina because that sounds really interesting. Definitely sounds like something that fits with the National Book Award and things it has been interested in based on that description. So I feel like this is another book that feels like it could make the shortlist. So that is really interesting. Now we get to the one book on this long list that I have actually read. And it's another one that you are guaranteed to have heard of if you are a literary person at all. That is James by Percival Everett, one of the biggest books of the year, critically, just in general. Odds are you have heard of this book. And if you haven't, that's fine, but I am surprised. And I'm going to let them do the description of this book, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. When the enslaved Jim overhears that he is about to be sold to a man in New Orleans, separated from his wife and daughter forever, he decides to hide on nearby Jackson Island until he can formulate a plan. Meanwhile, Huckleberry Finn has faked his own death to escape his violent father, recently returned to town. As all readers of American literature know, thus begins the dangerous and transcendent journey by raft down the Mississippi River toward the elusive and too often unreliable promise of the Free States and beyond. While many narrative set pieces of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn remain in place, floods and storms stumbling across both unexpected death and unexpected treasure in the myriad stopping points along the river's banks, encountering the scam artists posing as the Duke and Dauphin, Jim's agency, intelligence, and compassion are shown in a radically new light. This, to me, automatically feels like a shoo-in for the National Book Award, so I'm not surprised to see it here. And this sort of kicks off a thing. There are 3 books from the Booker Prize Longlist that have appeared, I believe it's 3, that have appeared on the National Book Award Longlist. And that feels like a lot, but to me it almost feels more surprising that the Booker recognized such a breadth of and quality of American literature that it doesn't really feel surprising that they also showed up on the National Book Award for fiction Longlist. And I know a lot of people have a mindset that you need to spread the wealth when it comes to book prizes. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think the notion that a book could potentially someday win the Booker Prize, the National Book Award, the Pulitzer Prize, possibly even the Women's Prize, I don't think all 4 would ever happen. It seems impossible. I do think it's possible that a book will someday win the Booker Prize and the Pulitzer Prize. Could the National Book Award get thrown in there? Possibly. Demon Copperhead got the closest we have gotten so far because it won both the Women's Prize and the Pulitzer Prize, but it wasn't even longlisted for the Booker Prize, and it didn't appear in the mix for the National Book Award either. James feels like a book that could go far. And even though I was a little muted on the ending of James, this is a book that I really liked, and it has sat with me a lot since I read it. And it's a book that I am happy to see succeed. So, even though I was a little muted on the ending, I think it's a book that certainly is good enough and has the quality to win the Booker Prize, the National Book Award for Fiction, the Pulitzer Prize. And I get really excited thinking about whether or not someone could go the distance and pull a hat trick, or maybe even Percival Everett will never get the Women's Prize for Fiction. It's just not going to happen. But it would be really interesting to see how far this book can go. I do think it has a good chance at winning the Booker Prize. I do think it has a good chance at winning the National Book Award. Once both of those things happen, the Pulitzer happens last. It'll be months in the future. So there's time for things to calm down a little bit. But on the other hand, it feels like if this gets like a 1-2 punch, it'll be a tougher sell for the Pulitzer. But if they're thinking just in terms of quality American literature, I don't know. Point is, I am really excited to see how far this book goes. I think it feels like a shoo-in for the shortlist for the National Book Award for Fiction. If it does not make it, it will be shocking. I feel like it's a shoo-in for the shortlist for the Booker Prize, which, by the way, will be coming out on Monday, so stay tuned for that. I'm hoping to do a reaction video as soon as that is released as well. So I'm just excited to see how far this book can go. And I know a lot of people say you have to spread the wealth. It's really boring if something wins more than one prize. You have to share things. Well, I don't think you would say to Serena Williams, you won the US Open, you should sit out the next tennis tournament. You wouldn't say that. If Simone Biles won the all-around gold medal, you wouldn't say you need to sit out of the individual event championships because you've already had enough. No, you wouldn't say that. Let's just cheer on a book and see if it goes. It would be a little less fun if it was a book that I didn't like. However, I'd like to think that I would still potentially be excited by things like that. So, or just the notion that a book could go so far and achieve so much. I think that's exciting. I think that's thrilling. James feels like a book that could easily end up doing that. And I cannot wait to see how far it ultimately goes. Then we have Miranda July with All Fours. I attempted a story collection of hers earlier this year, and it felt like it was too cute by half, like kind of trying to be quirky and fun in a way that I just was not responding to. So I put it down and unhauled it. And from all of the descriptions and reactions to All Fours that I've seen so far, I feel like the same thing would happen for me with this book. However, I do also see why a lot of people respond to her work more than I do. So I just feel like she's not an author I respond to, but I'm not entirely surprised to see her here either, if that makes sense. From the publisher, A semi-famous artist announces her plan to drive cross-country from LA to New York. 30 minutes after leaving her husband and child at home, she spontaneously exits the freeway, checks into a nondescript motel, and immerses herself in an entirely different journey. With July's wry voice, perfect comic timing, unabashed curiosity about human intimacy, and palpable delight in pushing boundaries, All Fours tells the story of one woman's quest for a new kind of freedom. Part absurd entertainment, part tender reinvention of the sexual, romantic, and domestic life of a 45-year-old female artist, All Fours transcends expectation while excavating our beliefs about life lived as a woman. And it's just funny because I think if anyone else had written it, I probably would be completely drawn in by that description of the book. But because it is Miranda July, and I just recently had that experience where I did not respond to something she had written at all, I'm much more hesitant. But if you have read All Fours and you think I should change my mind, let me know, because it's possible. It's possible. Now we get to something else that is on the Booker Prize long list, and that is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. Creation Lake is a novel about a secret agent, a 34-year-old American woman of ruthless tactics, bold opinions, and clean beauty who is sent to do dirty work in France. Sadie Smith is how the narrator introduces herself to her lover, to the rural commune of French subversive on whom she is keeping tabs, and to the reader. Sadie has met her love, Lucien, a young and well-born Parisian, by cold bump, making him believe the encounter was accidental. Like everyone Sadie targets, Lucien is useful to her and used by her. Sadie operates by strategy and dissimulation, based on what her contacts, a lot of air quotes in this description, shadowy figures in business and government instruct. First, these contacts want to incite provocation. Then they want more. In this region of centuries-old farms and ancient caves, Sadie becomes entranced by a mysterious figure named Bruno Lacombe, a mentor to the young activists who communicates only by email. Bruno believes that the path to emancipation from what ails modern life is not revolt, but a return to the ancient past. Just as Sadie is certain she's the seductress and puppet master of those she surveils, Bruno Lacombe is seducing her with his ingenious counter-histories, his artful laments, his own tragic story. This is a book that has been a little bit divisive on the Booker long list, so it'll be interesting to see if it makes it onto the shortlist for the Booker Prize, which again is coming on Monday, and it will be interesting to see if it makes it onto the shortlist for the National Book Award. I feel like I wouldn't entirely be surprised if it doesn't make either shortlist. It's kind of like the opposite of James, just because it has been so divisive. However, the very fact that it appeared on both long lists indicates that the Booker jury and the jury for the National Book Award are comprised of people who did respond to the book's charms. So it could really go either way. I feel like the feedback that I've already gotten on Creation Lake from people who have been reading the Booker Prize long list has convinced me that I'm going to sit it out for now. But possibly if it ends up on more best of lists or things like if it makes it onto the short list for either prize or both, maybe I will reconsider. But for now, I feel very comfortable letting other people read Creation Lake and enjoy it, and I'll just sit on the sidelines and hang out by myself, I guess. Let's just do the other book that is on the long list for the Booker Prize, and that is My Friends by Hisham Matar. This is another book that it'll be very interesting. I feel like James and My Friends have a pretty good shot at getting on the shortlist for the Booker Prize, and I feel like both of them could have a really good shot at getting on the shortlist for the National Book Award. So it's just really interesting how many intersections there are between the Booker and the National Book Award this year. That hasn't really happened since Shuggie Bain, because Shuggie Bain obviously won the Booker Prize, and it had been shortlisted for the National Book Award. So there was like this bizarre scenario where Douglas Stewart could have won two major literary prizes, like one after the other, because if I remember correctly, in 2020, the awards announcements happened in consecutive days. So he could have won the Booker Prize and then won the National Book Award. He ended up losing the National Book Award to Interior Chinatown. I don't know why I remember that so distinctly. Hasn't happened since, and because there are 3 books that have crossover on both lists, it's just going to be fascinating to chart how this goes. One evening, as a young boy growing up in Benghazi, Khalid hears a bizarre short story read aloud on the radio about a man being eaten alive by a cat, and has the sense that his life has been changed forever. Obsessed by the power of those words and by their enigmatic author, Hossam Zawa, Khalid eventually embarks on a journey that will take him far from home to pursue a life of the mind at the University of Edinburgh. There, thrust into an open society that is miles away from the world he knew in Libya, Khalid begins to change. He attends a protest against the Gaddafi regime in London, only to watch it explode into tragedy. In a flash, Khalid finds himself injured, clinging to life, unable to leave Britain, much less return to the country of his birth. To even tell his mother and father back home what he has done, untapped phone lines would expose them to danger. When a chance encounter in a hotel brings Khalid face-to-face with Hossam Zawa, the author of the fateful short story, he is subsumed into the deepest friendship of his life. It is a friendship that not only sustains him, but eventually forces him, as the Arab Spring erupts, to confront agonizing tensions between revolution and safety, family and exile, and how to define his own sense of self against those closest to him. Now, if we were talking about the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, I would be pointing out how the the mandate for the Pulitzer Prize is to recognize an American piece of fiction by an American author, preferably detailing American life. I've worded that badly. I'm paraphrasing, essentially. And the definition of American author has changed this year because they are allowing people who have been residents of the United States to compete. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But for the Pulitzer, I would be saying this really doesn't sound like an American story because you have someone who grew up in Benghazi, who goes to the University of Edinburgh, who attends a real protest that happened in Britain. So America doesn't really come into it. The National Book Award, even though the national refers, the nation is the United States, the National Book Award doesn't really concern itself with that. It does love to challenge perceptions of America and myth-making about America. So if it were the Pulitzer, I'd say this almost feels disqualifying because while juries have flouted or broadly interpreted detailing American life, the National Book Award feels like it plays kind of fast and loose with that. So even though it does not feel like an American story, to steal some of the air quotes from the description of Creation Lake, the National Book Award probably won't care. So I don't think that'll be something that will come into play here. We have two more books to look at. The next one is something I actually just heard about for the first time this week, like 2 days ago. It's You're Dead by Sam Sachs. In between the space of time when Ezra lights himself on fire and when Ezra dies, the world of this book flashes before their eyes. Everyone Ezra's ever loved, every place they felt queer and at home, or queer and out of place, reveals itself in an instant. Unfolding in fragments of memory, Ezra dissolves into the family, religion, desire, losses, pains, and joys that made them into the person that's decided on this final act of protest. Told in lyric fragments that span both lifetimes and geography, You're Dead is a queer, Jewish, diasporic, coming-of-age story that questions how our historical memory shapes our political and emotional present. And if I hadn't heard of this book 3 days ago, I would be having a Secret Lives of Church Ladies moment again, because that sounds really fascinating. It sounds like a lot of things that I like. It sounds difficult, for sure. Reminds me of 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world, which is something that had been shortlisted for the Booker Prize a couple of years back, and which I have a copy of and I haven't managed to read yet. But I still want to, in that it's set in that space before someone dies. And it just sounds fascinating. So I'm going to leave this tab open because I'm going to look for that. And where did I hear about this book? Simon Savage. I saw him talk about it in a wrap-up of books that he had read, and he really liked it. So I feel like I'm going to need to try to track down a copy of this book. Let's move to the final book on the fiction long list, which is Rejection by Tony Tula-Timuti. I really hope I pronounced that correctly. If I did not get it, please let me know. If I've mispronounced any of the names, let me know in the comment section down below, please. I looked it up, and I didn't see a quick video where somebody said his name, so I had to rely on a phonetic thing. So hopefully I got it right. From the publisher. By the way, this is one of the books that I am completely unfamiliar with, so this description is going to be my first experience of what this book is about. Let's see if we get another Secret Lives of Church Ladies moment. Rejection is a provocative plunge into the touchiest problems of modern life. The 7 connected stories seamlessly transition between the personal crises of a complex ensemble and the comic tragedies of sex, relationships, identity, and the internet. In The Feminist, a young man's passionate allyship turns to furious nihilism as he realizes over 30 lonely years that it isn't getting him laid. A young woman's unrequited crush in Pix spirals into borderline obsession and the systematic destruction of her sense of self. And in Ahagao, or The Ballad of Sexual Regression, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a shy late bloomer's flailing efforts at a first relationship lead to a life-upending mistake. As the characters pop up in each other's dating apps and social media feeds, or meet in dimly lit bars and bedrooms, they reveal the ways our delusions can warp our desire for connection. Rejection is a stunning mosaic that redefines what it means to be rejected by lovers, friends, society, and oneself. And I think it happened again. Not as strongly as You're Dead, and even You're Dead, I would say not as strongly as Catalina. I think the standout of the books that I was unfamiliar with is definitely Catalina. So those are the books on the long list. Hi, Editing Greg is here because I realized I forgot to talk about what you don't see on the long list for the National Book Award for Fiction, and Teddy wanted me to make sure I covered that. So here we are, ready to talk about that. First, I think you don't want to see the National Book Award completely mimic the Booker Prize, but there are 3 other books from the Booker Prize long list that feel a little bit like they could have been contenders here. The first one is Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, but you also have Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle, which the New York Times, by the way, has been a huge fan of, and I fully expect to see that on their top 10 books of the year. So either Wandering Stars, Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle, or Playground by Richard Powers. Those feel like kind of surprising omissions here. Not necessarily so, because you don't want to see the Booker Prize and the National Book Award long list just look exactly the same. But those are 3 books that definitely could have been contenders. It also would have been nice to see Fire Exit by Morgan Talty in the mix. He also didn't make the long list for Night of the Living Rez, which I think would have been a great inclusion on the long list. So interesting to not see that there. Real Americans by Rachel Kong would have been an interesting choice. I fully thought Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser Ackner would have made it onto the long list, and it's not here. And then Small Rain by Garth Greenwell. So those are just some omissions that I noticed. And let me know what you don't see on the long list that you would have liked to see in the comment section down below. Now, because there are 10 books, I believe the shortlist is 5 books. So what could potentially make it? Well, I've already said, I think James is feeling like a shoo-in. I think Martyr will definitely make it. The way the National Book Award loves inventiveness and imaginative books that sort of think outside the box, James feels much more traditional, but Percival Everett is definitely not. And the way he approaches reimagining Huckleberry Finn will go far with the National Book Award, I think. And Martyr is frequently described as one of the most imaginative and out-of-the-box storytelling things. I feel like these 2 are gimmies. I do think Jessica Anthony's The Most. This is where you go down rabbit holes. I feel like The Most is something that Lauren Groff would be really interested in. So I'm stuck in my head thinking about what Lauren Groff will like this, and forgetting that there are other people on the jury as well. But it definitely feels like something the author of Matrix and The Vaster Wild would be interested in. So I immediately start thinking about that one. I left Catalina, You're Dead, and Rejection open. If my prediction for the shortlist, just, offhand, is James, Martyr, and The Most, that only leaves me 2 other slots. So I'm going to say maybe Catalina and You're Dead. Just quickly offhand. That's my wild, irresponsibly spur of the moment prediction for what might make the shortlist. I would love to hear what you think of this long list, what you think might make the shortlist, what you think it means in the larger scheme of book prizes. Do you think James could go all the way with a hat trick, all of that stuff? Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.